you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description. Welcome to Mindshock True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire. You are listening to the Delphi series examining the Delphi case, the murders of Liberty German and Abigail Williams. This is episode 6, Staged. Now, the previous episodes, one of them regarding the dark hours, where I brought this information forward that I've been actually discussing since episode 1, the possibility that the bodies were not where they were found and why so many people are being triggered by this, when the actual former prosecutor came out and said that the scene could very well have been staged and that it was consistent with staging. So I don't know why people are addressing or focusing their triggering on me, because for whatever reason, their small minds can't handle the possibility that a killer would bring bodies back or stage them in any fashion, when obviously, I mean, this is rampant in true crime cases. I don't want to say it's the majority of the time. I'm not insinuating that in any way. I'm not even saying 50-50. I'm saying in a certain percentage, even if it's not that high of a percentage, there's a certain percentage where bodies are staged for a variety of reasons. And then, of course, not knowing the reasons doesn't mean something didn't happen. If you don't understand calculus equations, that doesn't mean the equations aren't true or they're unsolvable just because one individual's small or incompetent mind can't do it. That's something to keep in mind. And then we're going to be looking at further definitive proof that the bodies were not there during the searches. This case is amongst the most requested in Mindshock because, of course, we approach everything logically, objectively, neutrally, scientifically, without biases or without getting triggered that certain people are willing to explore other avenues in unsolved cases. It's almost like there's a concerted effort to keep cases from being solved. Certain cases, not a lot. It's not seen that much in the Delphi case. It's mostly other cases like the Maura Murray case or the Stephen Avery case. But I just noticed that in regards to the scene possibly being staged, that's causing a lot of triggering online, an unusual amount. Does that mean there's something to it? Does that mean certain individuals, possibly connected to law enforcement, do not want this avenue explored? I don't know. But the truth is not afraid of investigation. And one more quick point on our previous episode, episode 5, Bridge Guy Arrested. There's a lot of people who are really bereft of logic, reason, and even basic English comprehension. Bridge Guy was arrested. This is coming from law enforcement. That episode title is aptly titled. If you're deficient in English, then maybe instead of just making triggering comments about clickbait titles, perhaps break that dictionary out. See what it means to be arrested. See what a suspect is, a person of interest. Then you can read the actual law enforcement memos that I directly read from in the previous episode that stated that Bridge Guy was arrested. I mean, this isn't rocket science. But of course, Mindshock does attract a varied crowd, let's put it that way. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Big thanks to all the people that donate. Much appreciated. We can bring out more episodes in more cases and cover a lot of newer cases that we will also be doing. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel, hit that bell for notifications. Make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through. If that's still not working, you can just go to youtube.com/Mindshock for all the latest info and podcasts. Keep the awareness up in this case and demand justice, because justice delayed is justice denied. If law enforcement does know a lot more than they are saying, the public should make it known that they're still interested in this case and that they're not going away and that interest is not going away. If you agree with that message, you find this podcast informative, hit that like button and share it across social media platforms, of which you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for a case topic, logical analysis, co-podcast requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Big thanks to all the previous and current patrons. Everything is appreciated. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. Please, I do ask that you at least have a children's level understanding of the English language if you are going to do so. Otherwise, it's just a big waste of time for all parties involved. All right, so I will start this off once again. I will once again reiterate the words of the actual former prosecutor, not goofballs online who are not involved in the investigation in any capacity. So this is former prosecutor in unsolved Delphi rail track murders of 2 teens say the killer left behind at least 3 signatures at the odd crime scene, which had a lot of physical evidence, as victim sister renews her appeal for justice. So this former prosecutor is, of course, Carroll County Prosecutor Robert Ives. You can find these quotes on various news articles. The one that came up on the first search, dailymail.co.uk. You can verify this on the Down the Hill podcast as well as other news media outlets for those that, for whatever reason, cling desperately to genetic logical fallacies where if it's on a certain website that they don't like, it must not be true, despite the fact that it's also on many other websites. Okay, so these are his words, not mine. There was a lot more physical evidence than that at the crime scene, Ives said, and it's probably not what you would imagine or what people would think I'm talking about. So in no uncertain terms, he's making it clear that this is not your average crime scene. So it's not what you would expect to see from someone who kidnapped or crime of opportunity of some kind, marched them off a trail and killed them. This is not that kind of scene. This is not what you would expect to see. It's very clear. I mean, even people with English as their second, third, fourth languages, this is very clear. It was just not your normal, a person was killed here crime scene. That's probably all I can say about it, Ives said. Ives said that the scene was odd and displayed at least 3 signatures, which are unique behaviors by the killer. Ives raised the possibility that elements of the scene had been staged in an attempt to trick investigators by sending them down a false path. Now, what does that mean exactly? So, again, he's being very cryptic, and he hasn't received a lot of information. So, all of these supposed informed commentators online who are getting triggered at the very notion that the bodies were not where they were found without actually having seen the scene. If you haven't seen the scene, you have no place to say whether they were killed there or not. And even if you have seen the scene, you still wouldn't know. If you're a trained investigator or a prosecutor, perhaps you can surmise, you can make some theories, but we're going to be getting into actual definitive science. More than just the common sense that the trees were bare, and you might see bright colored jackets through the tree lines, specifically when you're searching for people, but even if you're not, and that's the thing, even people just randomly walking the trails. Again, this is an unusually warm day, so there would be more people out and about than usual in February. So we also have to consider that that disturbance in that area down the hill, just off the end of the bridge where supposedly the girls were marched down, if that's what happened, if it was one person or multiple people that did this, if they were armed, not armed, obviously, if we weren't there, we don't know. But that was spotted, and that area was specifically searched, and there were people specifically looking in every direction. So would you notice bodies? or even clothing, because supposedly there were pieces of clothing that were not with the bodies. Again, these are relatively bright pieces of clothing. We're talking about before it got dark, there was a window where, again, they were specifically searching for people, for these girls. Okay, so let's get into the hard evidence, make of which what you will. So there is a YouTuber, Matt Sullivan, who has put out some information regarding law enforcement corruption. I'll be getting more into that in the next episode, although there are tie-ins here. I will say this here. If law enforcement, let's say they did get the guy, but he was involved in some kind of corruption with law enforcement, they covered the whole thing up. They said, obviously, they were stating there's no danger to the public, as if they knew that for sure. How would they know that? How would they know it's not a serial killer who's also going to kill other people? What information were they working with when they made these statements at these press conferences? Is it because they knew the guy, they had the guy, and they knew he wasn't going to do anything else? Somehow. Then that would cause them to make these statements? Either way, Matt Sullivan makes some very interesting points. He names names. And he is quite astute in his research. There are certain, we could call them jumps or connections he makes, I don't know if he's making them for the sake of simply theorizing or actually stating that it is definitive truth. Either way, I will go over something that's not talked about. The thermal imaging drone that was used in the search that night that did not record any thermal signatures. So around 4 p.m., that's when Becky, Tara, Derek, and Cody are searching all over the trails. 4:30 p.m., Mike Patty arrived to search the trails. 4:45, Kelsey German arrives. 5 p.m., Mike Patty sends a text message to his friend in law enforcement. And between 5:05 and 5:30 p.m., Carroll County Sheriff's officers begin arriving at the scene. So Carroll County Sheriff's Department, as reported by Matt Sullivan, only had 11 police officers on the force. They take the lead for this search. This being the modern age, family and friends start sharing all of this on Facebook. Girls are missing, help with search, and more family and friends arrive to help with the search. Local police also assists with the search. Okay, so at approximately 5:45 p.m., Chief Lesenby gets in contact with someone who contacts drone operator Mike Bootram. Now, Bootram has a drone equipped with an FLIR camera, which includes this is a thermal imaging camera. Now, this is not some cheapo little camera. If you go to their website, FLIR.com, a lot can happen in a split second. The right information at the right time could mean the difference between lives saved and lives lost. When your mission means everything, intelligent imaging ensures success. So these are cameras made for and used by emergency search and rescue teams, the military. This is not some just basic civilian tech camera, although obviously anybody could use it, but they make legitimate products for various professional and government entities. So again, this is not some glitchy, cheapo camera that might have missed someone. Now, so Mike Bootram actually flew the drone from 2 different points all around the bridge and river area and the entire trail system. And he did not see the girls. No bodies, but he did see, and again, the thermal imaging captured searchers and deer even. Okay, this is sensitive thermal imaging technology. This is not some, again, cheapo, defective, weak thermal imaging. So we will get into, in a moment, the speed at which the human body loses heat, because obviously that is critical for calculating this. So Matt Sullivan got in contact with the operator, and these are the text messages shared here. I was at the sheriff's station right before dusk. So again, there's still some light out, and followed the sheriff to a high point along the trail near one of the girls' homes. Flew with the thermal camera and could see deer and people searching along the creek, but did not see the girls. Then moved to Bridge and flew there up and down the creek, saw the same, people searching and animals. He mentions that this was a quad drone with a FLIR Duo R thermal camera. He states, I flew the creek area from the highest point near one of the girls' houses, then at the bridge up and down the creek, flying around 200 feet from where I took off. I was in a hurry and do not have the footage. This is 2020 when he's relaying this information. I saw people in the creek and out of the creek, screeching wildlife, but no girls. So again, this footage would be interesting to see, because he's saying he saw people in the creek. So if you're in the creek right near where the bodies were found, would you see bright colored clothing and the bodies? Once again, I'll repeat that. He's stating he saw people in the creek. So now we're not theorizing whether or not you would see the bodies off the trail. You might see a blurb of bright clothing, maybe, depending, in the creek, possibly, wherever it was discarded. And whether or not you would see the bodies themselves, probably not, but you might see some bright colored clothing. However, if you're in the creek and you're looking in that direction, how many yards would you see the body? And of course, whether or not the bodies were seen or not, and whether or not the bodies were there or not, that's two separate things. Maybe they were there and they were not seen, but if that's the case, wouldn't the thermal camera have picked up the heat signatures? Obviously, we will get into the exact mathematical formulas at which heat dissipates from a body after loss of life. But again, in terms of line of sight, from the creek and around the creek, what is the line of sight to have seen bright pieces of clothing, if they were there at that time? Now, another thing to keep in mind, of course, it was supposedly unseasonably warm that day. So the weather reports were stating upwards somewhere around 46, between 40 and 46 in the hours in question that afternoon. But some of the family members in interviews had said it got up to 60 that day. So it's unclear whether it was quite a bit warmer than the actual weather report. Obviously, weather reports are not always 100% accurate, or even that accurate at all, depending on certain days. So regardless, we're not talking about sub-zero temperatures here where body heat would dissipate incredibly quick. We're talking anywhere between 40 and 60 degrees in these couple hours. After that, of course, the temperatures would plummet as the night goes on, but we're talking after 7, 8 p.m. is when it would drop into the 30s. So this is well after the thermal imaging drone, which would be taking place between 6 and 6:30 p.m. Sunset was 6:20 p.m. So he was flying the drone roughly a little bit earlier than sunset, through sunset, possibly a little after. So the murders, if they occurred, I mean, what kind of margin of error do you want to put here? We could say 2:30, 3 o'clock, approximately 3 o'clock. So the search is about anywhere between 3-4 hours after the alleged murder took place, if they were killed and dumped at that site, as many people believe, in that time sequence. In which case it would only be a few hours in 40 plus temperatures, possibly 50 plus. But if we're going by the actual weather archive, we're talking 40 plus temperatures. At 6 p.m., it would have been 43-ish. by 7 p.m. 41. That's if that's accurate. Supposedly it could have been a bit warmer, anywhere between 5 to 15 degrees warmer than that. But it's all a moot point, because let's do our calculations here. And actually, before we do the calculations, the FLIR dual thermal imager has a thermal measurement accuracy plus or minus 5 degrees Celsius or 5% of the reading. So it's fairly accurate. Fairly accurate. All right, so let's go into the science of forensics taphonomy. Algor mortis is the cooling of the body post-mortem, the result of cessation in thermoregulation. This is from ScienceDirect.com by Amy E. Rattenbury, Forensic Economics, 2018. So we're not looking at stuff from like a century ago, even though that stuff is still relatively accurate if you look at older textbooks. As body temperature is controlled by the hypothalamus, this homeostatic feature can no longer be maintained after death. Thus, the body temp will begin to change toward the ambient temperature of the room or surroundings in which the remains are found. So that temperature is between 40 and 50 something degrees. But let's go on the low end, so let's say it's closer to 40. Again, this is not 0 or below 0 temperatures where the cooling would occur much faster, but that might all be a moot point anyway, because we're going to be looking at the percent error here. This occurs through radiation, convection, conduction, and if the subject is wet, evaporation. Most commonly, the body temperature decreases, although in more extreme cases, an increase in cadaver temperature may result. Consequently, temperature change can play a particularly important role in establishing PMI, which in turn helps to reconstruct the chronology and circumstances surrounding death. Although a generally accepted principle is that body temperatures decrease by an average of 1 degree Celsius per hour. Okay, so it would only be 3 degrees, approximately 3 degrees Celsius cooler after approximately 3 hours. But research findings suggest that this process can be delayed by up to 3 hours in the initial post-mortem period. So the error runs only one direction in terms of generally average conditions. So again, we're not talking about in the Arctic or in the Antarctic with sub-zero temperatures. We're talking approximately 40 to 50 degrees, but even if we take the low end, 40, that's still above zero. That's still above freezing. And we're talking about possible delays. Now, in certain cases, the bodies can also warm, but let's take that out of the equation. So, let's also take the delay out of the equation, because if they were in the water is probably pretty cold. So let's take that 3 hour delay out, and we're talking up to 3 hours from point of death. So other sources have the body cooling at 1.5 degrees per hour in Celsius, which, again, depending on if they were wet in cold water, they could theoretically lose heat a little bit faster. So let's do the calculations here. So 37 degrees Celsius is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the average body temperature, or at least how they do it in forensics. They start at 37. So 1 hour, after an hour, it would be 36, which is 96.8 degrees, or 35.5, which is 95.9 degrees. Clearly detectable. Now, after an hour, now let's say they were dead 2 hours. So that would either be 35, which is 95 degrees, or if we're doing 1.5 per hour, that would be 34, which is 93.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, clearly detectable by a thermal imaging camera, even if we take into account, I believe there's up to 5% error or so. So that would be within a couple degrees. No big deal. It would still pick it up. Now, for people that don't know, these radiometric thermal imaging, this is in shade. So, for example, if there was a fire going at the time, obviously the fire would be at a much higher temperature than a human body or a deer walking by. So the fire would, of course, either be pure white. I think everybody's seen those movies where people with thermal imaging goggles or infrared, they if you look directly into a bright light, it'll cause pain because it's too bright. So it's in degrees of brightness is how these radiometric scans work. So obviously you also take into account distance. So he flew 200 feet and higher, so we're not talking miles and miles away. So these signals would be relatively strong. So if there was a fire, it would appear very obvious, and then it would be shades lower for different temperature readings. So, for example, there's not a huge difference between 93 degrees Fahrenheit and 98.6. So at 200 feet, it would probably appear relatively similar, but it would still pick up. So now let's go 3 hours. So that would be anywhere between 34 degrees Celsius, which is 93.2 Fahrenheit. And if we're doing 1.5 per hour, that would be 4.5 lost in a period of 3 hours. So that would be 32.5 degrees Celsius, which is 90.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's over 90 degrees. So even if we add a couple hours here, so it would still detect a relatively warm body. So no matter what, even if we add a lot of percent error here, even if we add a few more hours, I mean, we know the approximate time the drone flew, which was between 6 and 6:30 p.m. So it's kind of almost irrelevant whether you want to say they got murdered an hour earlier, an hour later, or even we could say 2 hours. We could even say if the Snapchat is fake and all that, what if they got killed earlier? They would still have a detectable temperature from a thermal imaging scan because it wouldn't drop that fast. So mathematically, it's an impossibility unless you want to say that the bodies were buried maybe, or there was something blocking the frequency from appearing on the thermal imaging camera. So what could that be? It could be lead. I mean, how many different things can you block this radiometric reading with? There's not that many things. The body would either have to be buried, or do you want to allege that they were in the water completely submerged, and then what? For how long? And then moved there after the body temperature dropped significantly? So even if the water temperature is, let's say, in the 20s, how fast would that accelerate the body cooling? It would obviously accelerate it. Even if we say it's twice as fast, that would theoretically still produce a reading with an air temperature of approximately 40 degrees, unless you want to say that they were held underwater somehow for a long period of time, then magically moved to the spot they were found. I mean, it's very difficult to account for how they could have lost heat that fast, or if they were covered by some kind of lead or some kind of material blocking the scan. Or do you want to really default to, well, this particular thermal camera was malfunctioning and for whatever reason could not detect anything lower than the average human temperature, which also seems highly unlikely. I mean, I don't know if we know if this was the very first time he was using this camera, but it seems like on a search and rescue, it would seem like he has to have some kind of an experience here, and that this was actually tested. And from all accounts, it seems like it's working. He's picking up humans and deer, so it doesn't seem like it's not working. So everything points in the direction of it working perfectly fine, and everything within the thresholds for normal errors, which would pick them up. Even if they were murdered earlier than what's alleged, it would still pick up the signature. Now, if that weren't enough for everyone, we have even more evidence. We have, again, this Matt Sullivan guy compiled a list here of many individuals who searched the exact area. Now, I don't know if they stepped foot exactly where the bodies were found, but within dozens of feet or so, these areas were searched. So a couple of interesting comments here from Facebook and scanners and testimonies. So supposedly Kelsey German is afraid of the dark. So she stated in an interview that she searched when it was still light out, then went back to work, then went to the police station, then went home and went to bed at 10 p.m. Which is a little strange too. Would you just go to bed at 10 p.m. if your sister is missing? I mean, I don't know. Again, there's a lot of people that are focusing on Kelsey German. For whatever reason, I mean, I haven't seen enough to convince me that she's actively involved in some kind of weird, bizarre cover-up. To me, I think this could all be explained as just teenage absent-mindedness and emotional stress and all of these things, maybe even false hope, or maybe not even necessarily false. What if she had turned up the next day and everything was fine and they had, I mean, obviously it was from all accounts, it was out of character for them to pull pranks or do anything of this nature that would cause this level of stress in the family. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that they experimented with drugs or alcohol or something, they went to party somewhere and they came back the next day, Kelsey German would not look that suspicious going to bed at 10 o'clock. And then also people respond to stress completely differently. For some people, it zaps all their energy, and maybe not necessarily they sleep, but they more or less pass out or just lay down for long periods of time. Whereas, of course, other people are so stressed out, they can't lay down. They have to pace or surge or do something. They have to move and do something because that's the way they respond to stress. So again, I don't read too much into that. On the other hand, I have not investigated it as much as other people. I haven't dissected each and every statement she has ever made on every single interview. It's very possible maybe she might be involved in some kind of illicit drug activity as well. That has nothing to do with her sister going missing, and that can come off a little strange to people. But anyway, she basically stated that she didn't search at night because she was afraid of the dark. So other testimonies, a Williams family member, another friend family member said the search was called off at a particular point. Then they stated the girls were found the next day where we already searched. Now, you want to call these people liars, or you want to say their social media got hacked, or you want to say someone used their social media to make false statements. I mean, I'm not discounting these possibilities, but what's the point of faking that at the time it's going on? Because this information is coming out already there. So at the time this is all unfolding. So again, you can call all these people liars, that's fine, but I'm just simply reporting the information alleged here, that the girls were found the next day where we already searched. So these are friends and family members making these statements. Brad German and his dog started to cross the creek and were stopped by a volunteer firefighter, was told not to cross the creek. It was already searched. So this is kind of curious because I am not sure this volunteer firefighter was ever identified. Again, anybody who knows this information in the comments, or was this someone posing as a volunteer firefighter, or maybe they really were? What is the reason to block Brad German and his dog and other individuals from searching the area that the bodies were found by being told it was already searched? So there's two things there. One, it could be nefarious, where they're either setting up a staging for later, or who knows, but they're lying and telling these people not to search there. Or if it honestly was searched, was this individual just saying, it's already been searched, let's search somewhere else? But from the language here, was stopped by a volunteer firefighter. Now, was told, so how was this done? Was this done violently? Was this done coercively, like they weren't being allowed to search there? Or was this a friendly suggestion? Oh, we already searched this. So it's unclear, although just from the context here, was told, was stopped. I don't know. It seems like, again, Brad German could elaborate on this. I'm not sure if he has, but other individuals were told the same by this volunteer firefighter. So at 11:45 p.m., the search was called off just before midnight. Family members continued to scour the area searching for Libby and Abby. At this point in time, Sheriff Leesenby said they had no reason to believe the girls were in imminent danger and the crews would resume their search in the morning. Now, if there is some kind of nefarious cover-up, if this area is being prepared to be staged and they don't want anybody searching in that area, is that how you would go about it? I don't know. I don't pretend to have this information. A lot of these commenters online say, well, what would be the reason to stage this or stage that? I don't get it, therefore it couldn't have happened. I mean, how silly can you get? I mean, what's the reason to kill people? It's just so messed up. I don't get it. I would never do it, but that doesn't mean that other people don't do it. So this kind of silliness is why a lot of these cases remain unsolved. We're not going to fall for that here on Mindshock. Now, Leesenby, of course, controversial decision to call off the search. I mean, this is silly nonsense. Even if foul play is not suspected, and I mean, why would it be suspected? But if these are teenage girls lost in the woods with plummeting temperatures, they might have been injured. Somebody could have fallen down some kind of a hill or tripped over something. There could be an injury involved. They could be lost. Who knows? There could be some kind of medical issue, medical condition. Somebody could have passed out. I mean, we really don't know the situation or what anybody was thinking, but it's insane that the search was called off and the official search was called off and there were certain excuses given, liability of difficult terrain to cover. Of course, not all of the terrain is difficult. Some of it is relatively flat. If the girls were searching, got lost, if the girls wandered around, got lost, let's say theoretically you were thinking they were on drugs, they don't know where they were. They could be found wandering a trail later. So they didn't necessarily have to be off the trails deep in the wilderness somewhere. But again, supposedly a lot of people, including police officers, still volunteered their time and searched throughout most of the night. And of course, we don't have a lot of information on those dark hours. If you haven't checked out the previous episodes, in episode 4, I go over the dark hours and the window of time that was available for someone to stage the bodies if they were staged. Now, another issue I'm going to be getting into in the next episodes, of course, are the law enforcement bizarreness. So, is Leesenby not a Keystone Cop? Is all of this on purpose from having a volunteer firefighter seal off the potential area where the bodies could be found if they were there or they would be later staged to reroute people away from the area, to calling off the search with all these weird excuses that were demonstrably false, like the girls were probably just at a friend's house. They called everybody they knew, so this was clearly not the case. But then also, mysteriously, there were no dogs available in the entire state of Indiana, and they had to call in dogs from Illinois. Whew, okay. All right, so that's bizarre. So it would take somewhere around 12 hours from the dogs from Illinois to come to assist in the search. Again, is this a Keystone Cop situation? Or is there intentional stalling and obfuscation involving weird, corrupt law enforcement and or other individuals that are kind of trying to figure out what to do to cover up certain tracks? And that's something we'll be examining further in the next episode. But this was just a quick look at the science of thermal imaging and how quickly bodies lose temperature. And again, the testimony of individuals who either searched the area where the bodies were eventually found or were told, other individuals who were told not to search the area because it had already been searched, and that's where the bodies turned up. And then why are certain individuals online so allergic to the use of basic logic and reason in discerning what is going on with this staged scene? This staged murder scene where, by all accounts, even if we take the mathematics and science of thermal imaging drones and body temperature dissipation out of the picture, just the sheer number of individuals, the colorful clothing, the line of sight issues from people searching, again, captured on drone camera, searching in the river and along the bank on both sides. Would they not have line of sight on? And again, it's not just the bodies. It's these colorful pieces of clothing that were found the next day, but were not found even during daylight hours during the search. Some people like to pretend the search only took place after sunset. That is obviously not true. The search was going on for a decent period of time before, during, and after sunset, including the drone camera flying from before sunset, during and after sunset, that entire time. So you don't even need the thermal imaging. You can see that these individuals are there searching. You can see that. So just as, again, we're talking basic logic and reason here. How could the bodies have not been found in the winter with barren trees, and the exact spot where they were found was supposedly a relatively flat clearing with even more thinning trees than in other areas? So it would have been easier to spot them there than, for example, in other more dense areas. This all needs to be kept in mind when objectively, logically, and neutrally looking at this case. And when we're examining, again, the case is as of yet unsolved, so we have to examine every avenue, including possible law enforcement complicity. Because, again, at this point, we have to examine every theory. What accounts for all these variables? Now, of course, the authority-worshipping cultists who believe that law enforcement can never, ever be complicit in any crime or cover-up, clearly they have not been paying attention. With every passing year, more and more law enforcement conspiracies are uncovered, and any logical individual not hopelessly indoctrinated into this cult of authority worship has to question, if there are this many law enforcement conspiracies being uncovered, how many are not being uncovered? And is the Delphi case one of them? Hope you guys enjoyed another edition of Mindshock True Crime in the Delphi case series. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. Make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through. If that's still not working, you could just go to youtube.com/Mindshock to manually peruse our ever-growing back catalog and also check when the latest podcast episodes are released. Keep awareness and the pressure up in this case, so hit that like button, share this podcast across social media platforms, of which you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest in the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, just leave them in the comment section. And again, I ask, please, 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 have at least a basic children's level comprehension of the English language if you are going to do so, in the interest of saving time. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.